Dr. Ethan Miller was known throughout the small town of Crestwood as a kind and reliable physician. For over 20 years, he had been a trusted figure, a man who always had time for his patients. His gentle demeanor, careful attention to detail, and compassionate bedside manner made him beloved by everyone in the community. Yet beneath his friendly smile and professional exterior, Ethan harbored a secret that would eventually shatter his career and leave scars on many lives. It all began on a cold winter evening when Ethan's private practice was teetering on the edge of collapse. The town's aging population was growing, and the costs of running the clinic were rising far faster than his income. Despite his best efforts, bills piled up, and the financial future of the practice looked bleak. Desperation can blur one's moral judgment, and that night, an opportunity presented itself in the form of a visit from a mysterious man. One evening, just as the clinic was preparing to close, a sharply dressed gentleman named Victor Hayes arrived. Victor carried an air of authority and introduced himself as a representative of a pharmaceutical company conducting trials on experimental drugs. He explained that his company was willing to pay handsomely for a discreet arrangement. Ethan was asked to administer these drugs to willing patients in exchange for regular payments. The offer was as tempting as it was dangerous. At first, Ethan recoiled at the idea. Using his patients as subjects in experimental treatments was something he'd always considered unethical. For several weeks thereafter, Victor returned to the clinic with quiet persistence. In low voices, he elaborated on the supposed benefits of the drugs, assuring Ethan that they had already been tested in controlled environments and were completely safe. The financial incentives were substantial, and Victor even provided assurances that each patient would receive not only monetary compensation, but also access to a new type of therapy that could potentially improve their health. Torn between his duty to heal and the desperate need to save his practice, Ethan eventually relented. He rationalized his decision as a temporary measure, a necessary evil to secure the clinic's future. Ethan began by carefully selecting a few patients who had expressed interest in alternative treatments. He explained that they would be part of a new program that promised advanced benefits over standard medications. Most of the patients, intrigued by the promise of improvement and a financial bonus, agreed to participate. In the beginning, the extra income was a godsend. The practice flourished, new equipment was purchased, additional staff were hired, and even a second branch was opened in a neighboring town. To the outside world, Dr. Miller had saved his clinic and was once again a pillar of the community. However, as months turned into years, troubling signs began to emerge. Some patients started reporting unexpected side effects, persistent nausea, bouts of dizziness, and an overwhelming sense of fatigue that wouldn't go away. A few even developed symptoms of chronic illness that could not be easily explained. Ethan, burdened by his secret, tried to dismiss these complaints as coincidences or the natural progression of age-related ailments. Deep inside, though, he was plagued by doubt. He meticulously recorded every treatment and every reaction, but the mounting evidence of harm could not be ignored. One patient, in particular, would come to haunt him. Sophie Caldwell was a bright, energetic young woman who had been enrolled in the experimental program for nearly 2 years. Initially, she had shown promising improvement and had even praised the new therapy. Over time, however, her health began to decline in subtle but unmistakable ways. At a routine checkup, Sophie suddenly collapsed in the examination room. Despite frantic resuscitation attempts, she died within minutes. The tragedy of Sophie's death sent shockwaves through Crestwood. Her family, devastated and distraught, demanded answers, and soon the whispers began to grow into a roar. Sophie's father, a retired investigative journalist, started combing through her medical records. He noticed discrepancies in the treatment logs, and the details of her symptoms did not match the official explanations. When he shared his findings with a local newspaper, the story quickly exploded. Reporters descended on the clinic, and soon the once respected doctor found himself under intense scrutiny. The community's trust was eroding fast. As the investigation unfolded, former patients came forward with their own stories of unexplained symptoms and deteriorating health. It became increasingly clear that the experimental drug trials were causing real harm. Ethan tried to defend his actions, insisting that he had acted in the best interests of both his patients and his practice. Yet every new testimony and piece of evidence chipped away at his defense. Meanwhile, Victor Hayes, the man who had introduced this dangerous arrangement, had vanished without a trace. His disappearance deepened the mystery and left Ethan isolated to face the mounting consequences alone. Local law enforcement soon launched a full-scale investigation into the clinic's practices. Interviews with former patients, staff members, and even neighboring businesses painted a grim picture of a man who, in a moment of desperation, had compromised his ethics. The evidence was overwhelming. Detailed records of irregular treatments, emails between Ethan and an unknown Victor, and testimonies that described a pattern of harm following the experimental treatments. The trial that followed was long and painful. In the courtroom, witness after witness recounted their suffering, describing the gradual decline in their health and the failure of the treatments they had once trusted. The atmosphere was somber as the community learned that the man they had revered was, in fact, responsible for so much pain. Dr. Ethan Miller sat silently as the weight of his actions was laid bare. His once confident eyes were now filled with regret and despair, and the courtroom felt as if it were closing in on him. Ultimately, Ethan was found guilty on multiple counts, including medical malpractice, fraud, and manslaughter. The sentence was severe: 25 years behind bars, a fate that stripped him of his freedom and his legacy as a healer. As he was led away in handcuffs on that cold day, Ethan's thoughts were consumed by regret. He wondered how differently his life might have unfolded if he had simply refused Victor's offer that fateful night. His decision, made under the crushing pressure of financial desperation, had not only ruined his career, but had also brought untold suffering to his patients and their families. In the aftermath, the town of Crestwood was left to pick up the pieces. The clinic was permanently closed, and new regulations were enacted to prevent similar abuses in the future. Sophie Caldwell's family continued their search for justice, their grief a permanent reminder of the high price of one man's mistake. And for Ethan, each day in prison was a painful lesson in how even the most trusted figures can have a dark side, a secret that can destroy lives when it is allowed to fester unchecked. The story of Dr. Ethan Miller serves as a stark reminder that desperate times can push even the best among us to make choices with far-reaching, devastating consequences. In Crestwood, the scars of that decision remain as a permanent testament to the fragility of trust and the enduring impact of secrets kept in the name of survival.